From New York, this is Democracy Now!
On January 6th, President Trump left everyone in this Capitol for dead. He never once said the one thing everyone around him was begging him to say: stop the attack.
On the second day of former President Trump's second impeachment trial, Democratic House impeachment managers released shocking video from inside the Capitol during the January 6th insurrection and audio of Capitol Hill police officers seeking backup help.
Your cops were still taking rocks, bottles, and pieces of flag and metal poles. Cruiser 50, the crowd is using munitions against us.
In this new security video, you can see the mob attacking officers with a crutch, a hockey stick, a bullhorn, and a Trump flag.
We'll speak with the nation's John Nichols, then to India, where farm workers continue to protest new agricultural laws, and authorities raided the offices of progressive news site NewsClick, which was closely covering the historic uprising. We'll speak with the legendary Indian journalist P. Sainath, founder of People's Archive of Rural India.
Condemnation seems to me too weak a word to apply to the events of the last 40 hours. A shameless attempt on the intimidation of the journalists and journalism of NewsClick.
All that and more coming up. Welcome to Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. Democratic House impeachment managers have released shocking video, never seen before, from inside the Capitol during the January 6th insurrection, showing lawmakers, as well as Vice President Mike Pence, scrambling to evacuate as violent Trump supporters were just yards away. Democrats described Trump as the insider-in-chief and said he was, quote, singularly responsible for inciting his supporters by spreading the big lie that the election was stolen. This is House impeachment manager Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands speaking at the Senate trial.
Donald Trump, over many months, cultivated violence, praised it. And then when he saw the violence his supporters were capable of, he channeled it to his big, wild, historic event. He organized January 6th with the same people that had just organized a rally, resulting in substantial violence, and made absolutely sure this time these violent rallygoers wouldn't just remain in place. He made sure that those violent people would literally march right here to our steps.
House impeachment managers also revealed that on January 6th, Trump sent out a tweet attacking Vice President Pence minutes after Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama told the president on the phone that Pence had been evacuated from the Capitol due to the riots. Democrats also revealed protest organizers did not initially have a permit to march from their rally site on January 6th, but the White House intervened to make sure people could march to the Capitol. We'll have more on the impeachment trial after headlines and speak with journalist John Nichols. In Georgia, the district attorney of Fulton County has opened a criminal investigation into Donald Trump's, quote, attempts to influence the administration of the 2020 Georgia general election. District Attorney Fani Willis has asked state authorities to preserve all records tied to the effort to overturn Joe Biden's victory in Georgia. On January 2nd, Trump asked Georgia's Secretary of State, the Republican, Brad Raffensperger, to, quote, find 11,780 votes, the exact number of votes he needed to win. In another call, Trump urged an investigator in Raffensperger's office to, quote, find the fraud. Georgia's Secretary of State's office has launched its own probe into Trump's calls to state officials. The Biden administration's announced plans to partner with New York and Texas to build 5 new large COVID-19 vaccination sites in communities of color hit hardest by the pandemic. Dr. Marcella Nunes-Smith is chair of Biden's COVID-19 Equity Task Force.
This is a perfect example of our equity work coming to life. And this is a model for the potential we have to do this well across the country. Through the new vaccination sites being announced today, we are taking the response directly to the communities that need it most.
This comes as the U.S. death toll has topped 471,000, by far the highest in the world. More than half of all U.S. COVID deaths have occurred since November 1st. A new report in the Lancet Medical Journal finds 40% of all U.S. COVID deaths could have been prevented. Meanwhile, the Centers for Disease Control and Prevention is now recommending people wear 2 masks, such as surgical mask with a cloth mask on top to reduce exposure. The World Health Organization is recommending the use of the Oxford-AstraZeneca vaccine for all adults. Some European countries have objected to giving the vaccine to people over 65. The Guardian reports the decision opens the way for the United Nations-backed COVAX program to start shipping doses to lower-income countries across the world. Saudi women's rights activist Lujain al-Hathloul has been released after being locked up for nearly 3 years in a Saudi prison. Her sister posted a photo of her Wednesday with a caption reading, "Lujain Hathloul at home after 1,001 days in prison," unquote. Under the terms of her release, Lujain al-Hathloul is barred from leaving Saudi Arabia and prohibited from discussing her time in prison, where she was reportedly subjected to electric shocks, waterboarding, flogging, and sexual assault. Lujain al-Hathloul was arrested May 2018 after leading a movement to lift a ban on women drivers and to overhaul the male guardianship system in Saudi Arabia. President Biden spoke with Chinese President Xi Jinping on Wednesday for the first time since taking office. The call came on the same day Biden visited the Pentagon, which has just launched a new military task force focused on China.
We need to take on the dangers and opportunities of emerging technologies, enhance our capabilities in cyberspace, ensure that we are positioned to lead a new era of competition from the deep sea to outer space. And we need to meet the growing challenges posed by China to keep peace and defend our interests in the Indo-Pacific and globally.
Earlier this week, China criticized the Biden administration for deploying 2 aircraft carriers to the disputed South China Sea to carry out military drills. Protests are continuing in Burma for a 6th straight day to condemn the military coup that ousted Burma's civilian leadership, including Aung San Suu Kyi. This comes as Burma's military junta has unveiled plans for a sweeping cybersecurity law and a move to crack down on free speech online. On Wednesday, President Biden imposed sanctions on Burma's military leaders.
The military must relinquish power it seized and demonstrate respect for the will of the people of Burma, as expressed in their November 8th election.
In news from Tel Aviv, the Israeli cabinet has approved a nearly $3 billion arms deal with the United States to buy F-35 and F-16 warplanes, Chinook helicopters, refueling planes, and thousands of bombs and advanced armaments. Meanwhile, in the West Bank, Israeli forces have demolished the Palestinian Bedouin village of Kirbet Hamsa al-Foka for a 3rd time this month. On Monday, Israel confiscated 9 tents that housed 61 people, including 33 children. Israel also demolished 5 livestock enclosures. Palestinian activist Abdullah Abu Ramah condemned Israel's demolition policy.
It has been completely razed and complete demolition for a clear purpose, to evict the residents and dislocate them from their lands that are fertile, vast, special, which is our future and the future of the residents here.
In media news, a columnist with The Guardian newspaper says he was fired after writing a sarcastic tweet criticizing U.S. military aid to Israel. Nathan Robinson, who edits the journal Current Affairs, had written for The Guardian since 2017. But his column was discontinued after the editor-in-chief of The Guardian, U.S., criticized a Twitter post of Robinson's that mockingly claimed all U.S. spending bills must include money to buying weapons for Israel. The Guardian has denied Robinson was fired, saying it regularly reviews its lineup of columnists. The U.S., on average, gives Israel $3.8 billion in military aid every year, larger than any other country. Immigrant rights advocates are criticizing the Biden administration after it announced plans to continue to turn away asylum applicants at the U.S.-Mexico border, keeping in place, at least for now, a policy implemented by President Trump. White House Press Secretary Jen Psaki spoke Wednesday.
Due to the pandemic and the fact that we have not had the time as an administration to put in place a humane, comprehensive process for processing individuals who are coming to the border, now is not the time to come. And the vast majority of people will be turned away. Asylum processes at the border will not occur immediately. It will take time to implement.
In Haiti, police fired tear gas at protesters and attacked journalists as thousands of Haitians took to the streets again Wednesday to demand President Jovenel Moïse leave office, accusing him of illegally extending his term.
We have announced that any initiative taken by Haitian President Jovenel Moïse to stay in power after February 7th is a coup. That is why Jovenel Moïse has to face the fury of the people. The people will respond proportionately. Clean slate.
Protesters also criticized the U.S. ambassador to Haiti after the Biden administration sided with Moïse's claim that he can serve for another year. Protesters say the head of the Haitian Supreme Court should serve as a transitional president until elections are held. But earlier this week, Moïse forced the retirement of 3 Supreme Court judges who were next in line of succession. In news from Honduras, Amnesty International is calling for an investigation into the death of 26-year-old nursing student Kayla Martinez. She died in police custody Saturday night after being arrested for breaking a COVID-19 curfew. Police claim she died by suicide, but federal authorities are now investigating her death as a murder. The Associated Press reports federal prosecutors have requested 7 police officers be turned over to investigators. In labor news, Amazon workers in Alabama are continuing to vote on whether to become the first unionized Amazon warehouse in the United States. The Intercept's reporting Amazon is paying a consultant with ties to the Koch brothers $3,200 a day to thwart the unionization drive. The consultant, Russell Brown, is the president of the Koch-backed Center for Independent Employees and the head of RWP Labor, which claims it helps companies with, quote, maintaining a union-free workplace, unquote. Amazon is headed by Jeff Bezos, one of the world's 2 richest men. Anti-nuclear activist Claire Grady reported to prison Wednesday. In 2018, she and 6 other Plowshares activists broke into the Kings Bay Naval Submarine Base in Georgia to protest the U.S. nuclear weapons programs. Grady was sentenced to a year in prison. 4 of her co-defendants are also locked up: Father Steve Kelly, Carmen Trotta, Patrick O'Neill, and Martha Hennessy, the granddaughter of Dorothy Day. And President Biden's nominee to head the Office of Management and Budget, Neera Tanden, faced intense questioning Wednesday over her past comments attacking progressives, as well as her ties to big business. Tanden has served as president of the Center for American Progress since 2011. This is Senator Bernie Sanders, chair of the Senate Budget Committee.
Your attacks were not just made against Republicans. There were vicious attacks made against progressives, people who I have worked with, me personally. Can you reflect a little bit about some of your decisions and the personal statements that you have made in recent years?
Yes, Senator, I really appreciate that question, and I recognize that my language and my expressions on social media, caused hurt to people, and I feel badly about that.
Senator Sanders also grilled Neera Tanden about the Center for American Progress's reliance on corporate donations.
According to the Washington Post, since 2014, the Center for American Progress has received roughly $5.5 million from Walmart, a company that pays its workers starvation wages, $900,000 from the Bank of America, $550,000 from J.P. Morgan Chase, $550,000 from Amazon, $200,000 from Wells Fargo, $800,000 from Facebook, and up to $1.4 million from Google. In other words, CAP has received money for some of the most powerful special interests in our country. How will your relationship with those very powerful special interests impact your decision-making if you are appointed to be the head of OMB?
Senator, I thank you for that question. It will have zero impact on my decision-making.
And those are some of the headlines. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman. On the second day of the second impeachment trial of President Trump, this one for inciting an insurrection, House impeachment managers presented detailed documentation of the events leading up to January 6th. Wednesday was dominated by the presentation of dramatic footage, some of it never seen before, of the violence that unfolded during the insurrection. Footage from security cameras shows the pro-Trump mob searching the Capitol building for lawmakers and coming within about 100 feet, sometimes far less, of the room where Vice President Mike Pence was sheltering with his family. House impeachment managers also played audio of Capitol Hill police officers seeking backup help desperately. As the chilling footage played in the Senate chamber, it was narrated by House impeachment managers Stacey Plaskett of the Virgin Islands and Congressman Eric Swalwell of California. This is Plaskett. Oh, and for our radio listeners, you'll hear some short silence when the closed-circuit video footage is playing. It doesn't have sound.
Note, as the video begins, we are seeing the inside view as the mob approaches from outside and beats the windows and doors. You can see that the rioter first break the window with the wooden beam that you saw previously, and a lone police officer inside responds and begins to spray the first man who enters, but is quickly overwhelmed. I want you to pay attention to the first group of assailants as they break into the building. The second man through the window is wearing full tactical body armor and is carrying a baseball bat. Others are carrying riot shields. You can see Vice President Pence and his family quickly move down the stairs. The Vice President turns around briefly as he's headed down. As you can see here, the staff moves from their offices through the halls and then enters a door on the right-hand side. That's the outer door of a conference room, which also has an inner door that they barricaded with furniture. The staff then hid under a conference room table in that inner room. In this security video, pay attention to the door that we saw those staffers leading into and going into. One of the rioters you can see is throwing his body against the door 3 times until he breaks open that outer door. Luckily, when faced with the inner door, he moves on.
This security video shows Ashley Babbitt, followed by others in the mob, turning the corner toward the House lobby doors where the members were leaving. In this security footage video, you can see them exiting. Many members are still wearing their gas masks. They walk just feet away from where Capitol Police are holding an insurrectionist at gunpoint. Just minutes earlier, that insurrectionist had tried to open the gallery door and thankfully was stopped by a tactical team. This security video from 2:56 p.m. shows the mob in the House of Representatives wing on the second floor of the Capitol. Insurrectionists who are still inside the building are fighting with the police, who are overwhelmed and trying to get them out. In this security video, you can see how the Capitol Police created a line and blocked the hallway with their bodies to prevent rioters at the end of the hall from reaching you and your staff.
Officer Goodman passes Senator Mitt Romney and directs him to turn around in order to get to safety.
Here in this new video, you see Leader Schumer walking up a ramp. Going up the ramp with his detail, he'll soon go out of view. Seconds later, they return and run back down the hallway, and officers immediately shut the door and use their bodies to keep them safe. So let's focus now on the attack and what it was like for the officers defending the Capitol that day. And again, I want to warn you that the following audio and videos are graphic and are unsettling. But it's important that we understand the extent of what occurred. Here's an audio recording from the radio traffic of the D.C. Metropolitan Police Department describing the violence.
Cruiser 50 and county were still taking rocks, bottles, and pieces of flag and metal poles. Cruiser 50, the crowd is using munitions against us. They have bear spray in the crowd. Bear spray in the crowd.
Hours after members of the House and Senate had left this area, on the west front of the building, the mob continued to grow, continued to beat the officers as they tried to get in. In this new security video, you can see the mob attacking officers with a crutch, a hockey stick, a bullhorn, and a Trump flag.
That's just some of the dramatic footage from January 6th that was shown Wednesday by the House impeachment managers as they built their case in the Senate chamber to impeach former President Donald Trump for inciting an insurrection. Republican Senator Mitt Romney said he spoke to U.S. Capitol Police Officer Eugene Goodman to thank him for coming to his aid after watching the new footage that showed the officer protecting him from the mob, telling him he needed to go in the other direction. House impeachment managers also revealed that on January 6th, Trump sent out a tweet attacking Vice President Pence just minutes after Senator Tommy Tuberville of Alabama told the president on the phone that Pence was being evacuated from the Capitol as they were speaking due to the riots. Democrats also revealed protest organizers did not initially have a permit to march from their rally site on January 6, but the White House intervened to make sure people could march to the Capitol. The impeachment trial resumes today at noon. Democracy Now! Is covering the trial gavel to gavel. We're streaming it at democracynow.org. When we come back, we'll discuss the historic events laid out by the House impeachment managers with the nation's John Nichols. Stay with us.
There once was a Union maid who never was afraid of the goons and the kings and the company pigs and the deputy sheriffs who made the raid. She went to the Union Hall when meeting it was called, and when those company goons came round, she always stood her ground. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union till the day I die. This Union maid was wise to the tricks of company spies. She couldn't be fooled by the company stool. She'd always organize the guys. She always got her way. When she struck for higher pay, she'd show her card to the National Guard, and this is what she'd say. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union. Oh, you can't scare me, I'm sticking with the Union. I'm sticking with the Union till the day I die. When this song was first sung, our fight had just begun, and Union maids in the needle trades organized till the job was done in ladies' auxiliary.
Union Maid, performed by Anne Feeney. The legendary Pittsburgh folk singer, songwriter, and self-described rabble-rouser has died of COVID at the age of 69. We'll be talking about her later in the broadcast. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, the Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman in New York, joined remotely by co-host Nermeen Sheikh. Hi, Nermeen.
Hi, Amy, and welcome to our listeners and viewers across the country and around the world.
Well, Democratic House impeachment managers laid out their case against former President Donald Trump Wednesday as the trial entered day 2. They released shocking video from inside the Capitol during the January 6th insurrection, showing violent Trump supporters were just 58 steps away from lawmakers. Democrats outlined how Trump spent months inciting his supporters by spreading the big lie that the election was stolen. This is the lead House impeachment manager, Congressmember Jamie Raskin of Maryland.
The evidence will show you that ex-President Trump was no innocent bystander. The evidence will show that he clearly incited the January 6th insurrection. It will show that Donald Trump surrendered his role as commander-in-chief and became the inciter-in-chief of a dangerous insurrection. And this was, as one of our colleagues put it so cogently on January 6th itself, the greatest betrayal of the presidential oath in the history of the United States.
For more, we're joined by John Nichols, the nation's national affairs correspondent. His most recent book, The Fight for the Soul of the Democratic Party, also the author of The Genius of Impeachment, the Founder's Cure for Royalism. John, welcome back to Democracy Now! Thanks for joining us from Wisconsin. Why don't we start out by you responding to what was revealed yesterday? Much of this footage we have not seen before coming from the Capitol's closed-circuit TV when they would show that it was silent and they would narrate it.
Well, thanks for having me, Amy. And I think the best way to understand it is that Tuesday was the procedural day. They explained why this trial was both legitimate and necessary. And Wednesday was the evidentiary day, where they explained why this is so important, the evidence confirming that. And the evidence that you saw was, as you suggest, in many cases, new footage and new material. But it was also a timeline. And what the various impeachment managers sought to do, and I think actually quite brilliantly, was to establish that Donald Trump had a constant interaction with this run-up to January 6th and what happened on January 6th. And once that was established, obviously you're talking about the impeachment and trial of Donald Trump, then you showed what happened and why it was so jarring, so horrifying, and so significant. In effect, what they're saying to the jurors, and the senators are 100 jurors, is A, this trial should be occurring, B, this trial is targeted at the right individual, Donald John Trump, and C, this trial is of enormous consequence because the incidents involved were, in fact, a genuine threat, as Jamie Raskin suggested, to the transition of power in the United States, one of the most vital constitutional constructs of the country.
And John, Jamie Raskin has asked Trump to testify in the trial, but of course his senior advisor, Jason Miller, said he will not testify in what he considers an unconstitutional proceeding. Now, the House had the option of issuing a subpoena to Trump to get him to testify, but they didn't do that. What do you think is going to happen? Trump has no intention of testifying.
Trump has no intention of testifying, and it's still an open question whether there will be any testimony or any witnesses. This is a fast-moving trial, and I think the managers have focused a lot of their attention on what they describe accurately as facts, as what you can show people. The president's tweets, the video from the Capitol, the video of the president's speeches, all of these pieces. Once they've done that, then there will be the question of whether you might call a witness. I am inclined to suggest that they probably won't attempt to subpoena Donald Trump. He has said he does not want to testify. And frankly, his testimony, I think, would probably add little to the process. But there is still the possibility that you will see witnesses. And the fascinating part of this is that some of the most compelling witnesses are jurors in the trial. It's notable that, for instance, Senator Lindsey Graham from South Carolina was on the phone to the White House and has, in interviews, said some, frankly, quite damning things about Donald Trump's, A, seeming enthusiasm for the people that were involved, and B, lack of engagement with and lack of willingness to intervene to try and stop the violence. And so we have some fascinating questions as regards witnesses. But at the end of the day, I still think the most compelling part of this trial is the presentation, the opening argument from the impeachment managers.
And John, could you also talk about where Republicans stand on the impeachment trial? Republican Senator Bill Cassidy has joined Democrats in voting against ending the impeachment trial, though he said that that does not mean that he would vote in favor of convicting Trump. He's among only 6 Republicans who've said the trial should not end. And you've written a piece called Trump's Congressional Co-Conspirators Are Just as Guilty as the President. Could you talk about that and where you think other Republicans will go on this?
Certainly. To establish up front, you need 67 votes if all senators are voting in order to convict. And that point of this trial is to reach a conviction. At least that is the point of the impeachment managers. And right now they have 5 or 6 Republicans who have seemingly indicated some openness to a conviction vote. As you well point out, it's not even assured that all of them will. But if you had that group, you'd have roughly 55, 56 votes for impeachment or for conviction. That's a large vote. That's significant because, remember, no president has ever been convicted. However, it is insufficient. The question in this Senate is whether Mitch McConnell, who really is the key force, and then I think John Thune at his side, whether they might at some point determine to lead a group of senators either to not vote or to vote for conviction. I think that's really an outside prospect, but it's certainly the one that Jamie Raskin and the impeachment managers are aiming at. What we do know, I think what we can be very assured of, is there are a number of members of the Senate who absolutely will not vote to convict Donald Trump because they are actually part of the conspiracy or part of the problem. And I would point especially to Josh Hawley from Missouri, whose own home state senator newspapers have said should be expelled from the Senate. Ted Cruz from Texas, whose own home state newspapers have said should resign, both because of their actions around January 6th. Also, people like Ron Johnson from Wisconsin. The fact is, we don't have enough time in this program to detail all of the intersections between the statements and actions of folks like Josh Hawley, Ted Cruz, Ron Johnson, and others in this run-up to January 6th and in what happened on January 6th. So it's a bizarre situation where you have jurors who actually are, as I've suggested, I believe, as guilty, and in case of Josh Hawley, maybe even more guilty than Donald Trump.
I want to go to House impeachment manager, Congressman Joaquin Castro of Texas.
You've seen all the evidence so far, and this is clear. On January 6th, President Trump left everyone in this Capitol for dead. When he wanted to incite his supporters to show up on January 6th, President Trump tweeted 16 times between midnight on January 5th and his noon rally speech the next day. 16 times to get them to do something he wanted. And his message in those 16 times was clear. Fight. Stay strong. Be strong. But when the violence started, he never once said the one thing everyone around him was begging him to say. Stop the attack. He refused to stop it. Donald Trump did not send help to these officers who were badly outnumbered overwhelmed, and being beaten down. 2 hours into the insurrection, by 3 p.m., President Trump had not deployed the National Guard or any other law enforcement to help, despite multiple pleas to do so.
So that's Joaquin Castro. Now I want to go to the House impeachment manager, Rhode Island Congressman David Cicilline, who laid out what Donald Trump was tweeting as the mob attacked the Capitol.
Nearly an hour after the rioters breached the Capitol perimeter, at 1:49, Donald Trump released a propaganda reel of his Save America speech that he'd given an hour before. I want to be clear. The events I just described, the rioters are breaching the Capitol, attacking law enforcement. The violence is being broadcast all over the television for the whole world to see, including the President of the United States. And I want to show you, this is what is happening right before Donald Trump sends that video out again, and as he does it.
Our country has had enough. We will not take it anymore, and that's what this is all about. And to use a favorite term that all of you people really came up with, we will stop the steal. Because you'll never take back our country with weakness. You have to show strength, and you have to be strong.
So, John Nichols, this is absolutely key. It's this contemporaneous showing the times of what President Trump was doing and what the mob was doing since he was watching it on TV, and apparently getting repeated calls from Republicans pleading with him to do something. The news we had earlier of Senator Tuberville admitting that Trump called him, and he said to him, "I can't talk right now," Tuberville said. Pence has just been evacuated because of the rioters, and it was after that that Trump attacked Pence once again in a tweet. And then you see, of course, the rioters, both inside and outside, saying, hang Mike Pence, actually setting up a noose. This issue, after the speech, because some of these senators will say, Trump has a right to say fight like hell, and that doesn't mean that he meant that people should be violent. But it's as this was all happening, explain the significance of revving them up, then telling them he loved them and they were patriots, as he learned how many police officers were down, were being attacked.
Sure. You're going right to the heart of the matter here, Amy, because in this prosecution of Donald Trump, obviously there are two core arguments. One is that Donald Trump set this thing up, that he called it into being. But a second argument, which I think will get more and more attention as the days go on, is his dereliction of duty once things occurred. Remember, he is the commander-in-chief of the United States. He is the most informed person, right? The President of the United States certainly knows what's going on in Washington. And he is getting direct appeals as well as appeals to his aides saying something horrible is happening just blocks away from you. You have the ability to intervene. You have the ability to call for both your supporters, your allies here, to stand down, but also to call for additional help to those who are at the Capitol. And instead of that, what we see is evidence upon evidence upon evidence that Donald Trump is, A, fascinated by, even perhaps in some reports, excited by what's happening at the Capitol, and B, not exercising, not acting in the manner that a president would be expected to do in such a circumstance. That goes to the heart of why you would impeach, try, and convict a president. And it's one of the reasons why I suggest to you that this is the most important impeachment trial in American history. And the reason for that is that it goes to the heart of why the impeachment power was created in 1787. It is to hold presidents to account when they act in a manner that might be that of a monarch or a king, when they take actions to perpetuate their own power that are dangerous to the republic. And here, by putting together the images of the violence, as well as all of the evidence of Donald Trump's enthusiasm for the protests on January 6th and his failure to respond to them, you sort of tie all the threads together for a classic and frankly, I think difficult to argue with, vote for conviction of a president who has violated his oath of office.
And John, you've written extensively on the lead impeachment manager, Congressman Jamie Raskin, whom we heard from earlier, and you've also been talking to him. So could you say a little about your conversations with him and also about his father, Marcus Raskin, whom you've also written about?
Certainly. Jamie Raskin is a remarkable historical figure in and of himself. And I think certainly his speech at the close of Tuesday's presentation, where he spoke about his personal experience, was so powerful that my sense is it will go down in history as one of the great speeches, not merely in an impeachment trial, but frankly in the history of the Congress. Jamie Raskin is a congressman from Maryland. Before he was the congressman, he was a longtime constitutional law professor. So you have this remarkable circumstance of a constitutional law professor actually at the center of a great constitutional moment. Beyond that, Jamie Raskin, as people who've followed the trial know, had a horrible tragedy in his life, the suicide of his son on New Year's Eve. He spoke about that and connected his own personal story, bringing his daughter and his son-in-law on January 6th to the Capitol, being separated from them in his comments. So he has a remarkable ability to weave the personal and the political. And I think that does root back to his father, a remarkable figure in American life, Marcus Raskin, who was an aide in the Kennedy White House, left the Kennedy White House to become a co-founder of the Institute for Policy Studies, and emerged really as one of the great intellectual figures on the left in America from the 1960s into the 2000s. He died, I believe, in 2017. And Marcus Raskin was a brilliant thinker about democracy and how it worked and how the structures of government needed to defend it. And so it wasn't surprising that his son, Jamie Raskin, quoted Marcus Raskin at the opening of Wednesday's remarks, and I'll make sure I say it right: democracy needs ground to stand upon, and that ground is the truth. And Jamie Raskin on Wednesday framed many of his remarks around this, the notion that truth and facts are the tools by which you hold a leader to account, particularly a leader who has done the damage to a country that Jamie Raskin and the other impeachment managers assert, I think correctly, that Donald Trump has done.
And speaking of legendary figures, as we wrap up, John, I wanted to ask you about Ann Feeney, the legendary Pittsburgh folk singer, songwriter, self-described rabble-rouser, who's died of COVID-19 at age 69, surrounded by family and friends. John, you've written about her. You knew her in a piece titled "The Wisconsin Uprising Was Glorious," and Ann Feeney sang its Solidarity song. This is a clip of her singing. What we are listening to and watching is Ann Feeney singing in the Wisconsin State Capitol building during the Wisconsin Uprising 10 years ago. John, we just have about 30 seconds. If you could talk about the significance of Ann Feeney's life, music, and art.
I think it was summed up in that clip. The Wisconsin Uprising began 10 years ago today on February 11th, 2011. You were there for much of it, Amy. And Ann Feeney, who is the great, passionate labor songwriter, came as quickly as she could to be there at the Capitol and to lead the crowds in singing what really was the theme song of that uprising, Solidarity Forever. She was a remarkable figure and said that her favorite place to sing was on a picket line. And I'll just remind you that two great figures from the Wisconsin Uprising, Ann Feeney and Karen Lewis, the head of the Chicago Teachers Union, both passed away in the last few days. And we remember them because the Wisconsin Uprising saw so much brilliant solidarity. And I think both Ann and Karen were embodiments of that.
And people can go to our website at democracynow.org to see our interviews with Karen Lewis, the late, great head of the Chicago Teachers Union. John Nichols, thanks so much for being with us, the nation's national affairs correspondent, host of the podcast Next Left. And next up for us, we go to India, where farm workers continue to protest new agricultural laws, and authorities have raided the offices of the progressive news site NewsClick. Stay with us. Shruggy by Brooklyn-based band Red Barat. This is Democracy Now!, democracynow.org, The Quarantine Report. I'm Amy Goodman with Nurmeen Sheikh as we turn now to India, where farm workers are continuing to take to the streets to demand Prime Minister Narendra Modi repeal 3 highly contested agricultural laws. Farm workers say the laws, which seek to deregulate markets and allow large corporations to set prices, threaten their livelihoods. On Saturday, tractors, trucks, and tents blocked traffic around India for several hours. A 4-hour railway blockade is planned for next week as protests show no sign of slowing down. On January 26, India's Republic Day, a protest in Delhi turned deadly after some people broke off from the main action and breached the historic Red Fort complex. One person was killed, hundreds injured. Last week, farmers held a vigil on the border of New Delhi for the deceased.
We are holding this candlelight vigil as a tribute to all those who lost their lives in this farmers' movement. We are also protesting against barricading and putting metal spikes at borders, and for solidarity with journalists who were arrested by the police. We are fighting for everyone and demanding for the Narendra Modi government to listen to us.
Dozens have died since the start of the protests. Many deaths were caused by the harsh winter as tens of thousands of farmers have camped out in the cold on the outskirts of New Delhi and other parts of India. The UN and rights groups are calling for Indian authorities to respect the right to peaceful assembly and stop its crackdown on the protesters, including internet shutdowns and censoring critics. Twitter's just come under fire after it blocked hundreds of accounts at the behest of Narendra Modi's government, which Twitter says threatened to lock up its local employees if it did not comply. Meanwhile, earlier this week, authorities raided the offices of progressive news site NewsClick, which has been closely covering the historic farm workers' uprising. For more, we go to Mumbai, India, where we welcome back P. Sainath, award-winning Indian journalist, founder of People's Archive of Rural India, or PARI. His latest published in The Wire is Rich Farmers, Global Plots, and Local Stupidity. P. Sainath, thanks so much for joining us. If you can talk about the crackdown on the very media that's giving voice to the mass epic protests around India right now.
Well, it's been on interrogations, detaining people. I think it's been on for more than 50 hours. The raids conducted on NewsClick, which, as you described, is a progressive media organization, an independent media organization, non-corporate. This is now being done by the Enforcement Directorate, which is not police strictly, but bringing in economic offenses, charges which they haven't made public, but plant in the journals of the ruling fraternity. And no one has explicitly said what the charge is, but laptops, servers, laptops, hard disks, phones have been confiscated, and at least 5 people are without their phones or their laptops, which have been taken over by the... But the main idea of doing this is to send a warning and a message to the rest of us, the independent media, yeah, and to say that you guys are not immune, and that we are going to crack in this way because, yeah, it might amount to nothing in the courts. It may be thrown out, but it's going to malign your reputation in public. So I call you a money launderer or something like that. None of that is going to stand up in court. But remember that they are backed by the greatest troll army in the world, payroll trolls of the ruling government. So, which, like last night, there was a video which, after a great delay, YouTube and Twitter took down, which named 10 independent media groups, including the People's Archive, as having been extremely dangerous people who should be jailed immediately, failing which the maker of the video feared for his life. Okay? So you've got the pressure from the government and you've got the silence and connivance of the corporate media. Independent media is having it as hard as it gets just now.
So, Sainath, could you talk about the mainstream media? You've pointed out the mainstream media's coverage, which you've been critical of, and you've also said the mainstream media is a strange term for news outlets that systematically exclude 70% of the population, as it does in India. Talk about how the mainstream media has been covering these historic protests.
Well, the newspapers are slightly more sophisticated than the channels. The channels are screamers, and they do pretty much what, some of them can make Fox News look, moderate. But remember, this is a completely hostile corporate media, completely with the government. You can look at the editorials on the latest budget of the government. One of the more liberal, supposedly pro-underdog newspapers says this is the most historic budget in decades. It's a terrible budget. But even, even at the best of times, coverage of rural India and farmers is about rural India as a whole, let alone farmers, is 0.67% of the front page in an average in any Indian national daily. Now, these newspapers, their inside pages, crime and entertainment get more space than all the social sector beats from environment, housing, poverty, development, farming, agriculture, climate change put together don't make the kind of space that crime and entertainment make. The same media has shed more than 1,500 journalists using the pandemic as an excuse. And you can guess which types of journalists get shafted. Since April last year, using the pandemic as an excuse, some of the, most cash-rich media companies in Asia or perhaps the world have thrown out more than 1,500 journalists and thousands of non-journalist media workers who I think are extremely important in the entire process of information generation. So you've got that on the one hand. Since April last year, the government and the police have arrested journalists under extraordinary provisions. You're all familiar with arrests of Indian journalists on charges of sedition. They've arrested them, filed FIRs or first information reports on charges under the Epidemics Act, under the Disasters Act, spreading demoralization, blah, 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 blah. So anyone, those who dissent, the message is clear. Dissent and you're doomed. There's between 70 and 80 first information reports filed against journalists. Journalists have spent 1 month in jail without being able to meet their lawyers because they've been arrested under extraordinary laws like the Unlawful Activities Prevention Act and you name it. This government has just completely gone berserk in its treatment of media. So those elements in the corporate media, the good journalists, are themselves intimidated and facing action. But now they've decided, NewsClick in particular, gained incredible traction and readership and viewership because of its coverage of the farm protests. Now, I know from our own experience of the People's Archive of Rural India, our numbers have doubled and trebled because we cover farmers. We've published more than 50 stories on just the protest at Delhi and surrounding areas since November. Now, NewsClick, which is based in Delhi, has had something like 40 million views of its YouTube channel in a single month. That was unacceptable to the government. It was since the corporate media are not giving them any information, those who need something are going there. The corporate media's approach to the farmers, these are all rich farmers. By the way, I put out the figures of what these farmers earn from Punjab, the richest farmers in the country. Their monthly household, and a household has more than 5 people in Punjab, monthly household income is 18,059 rupees, which is about $250. Okay, it's about $250 a month for 5 people, which means a per capita income for each farmer of that farm household of around $50. These are, and look at who directors of the IMF, etc., are writing condemning. These are rich farmers. Guys are writing on Twitter. I mean, these guys are writing on Twitter and Facebook. These guys earn more in an hour than an entire family household of farmers earns in a month, and they are trashing the farmers as rich farmers. So you're looking at the greatest troll army on the world, a hostile corporate media, and a government out to crack independent media. In NewsClick, the problem, I mean, it's always been a thorn in the side of authority. It has really angered them with its coverage of the farm protests. So this is the media scenario. And yeah, the media, the main media or the big media, cozy up to the government. By the way, you should know that the richest Indian in the world, the richest media owner in India, is also one of the 2 or 3 biggest beneficiaries of these farm laws, Mr. Ambani. So then those media that he does not own, he is very often the biggest advertiser. So why do you expect better from them?
And Sainath, we have just a minute left. Talk about where negotiations about these laws stand now. There is the Supreme Court appointed a committee to negotiate with the farmers. What's happened?
The committee could not negotiate with itself. Before its first meeting, 1/4 of the committee, meaning one member, it's a 4-member committee, resigned because his own farm group expelled him. Okay, that committee cannot talk at the end of 2 months. Its mandate. It's got a 2-month mandate to provide solutions. The only thing I can think of that happens in 2 months in agriculture is the maximum lifespan of pollinator insects. Okay. Now this group, it cannot talk to the farmers. The protesters won't talk to them. They don't take them seriously, and quite correctly so. So nothing much is going to happen by way of the committee. As I said to you the last time, the tactic is what I call death by committee. I declined when my name came up in the open court to be part of this process. So nothing but the negotiation. Look, they have tried and tried and tried to break these protests.
Sainath, we have 10 seconds.
Farmers. They're getting stronger. The protests are spreading wider. They are not stepping back.
P. Sainath, we want to thank you so much for being with us. Award-winning Indian journalist and founder of People's Archive of Rural India, known as PARI. And we will link to your article. That does it for our broadcast. Democracy Now! Produced with Renee Feltz, Mike Burke, Dina Guzder, Libby Rainey, Nermeen Sheikh, Maria Tadasena, Carla Wills, Tammy Warnoff, Tarina Nadura, Sam Alcoff, Tamari Astudio. I'm Amy Goodman with Nermeen Sheikh. Stay safe. Wear 2 masks.